To have you here.
Thank you.
So welcome everybody to our webinar on teaching pronunciation. And I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone, but you can unmute yourselves if you have a question. So pronunciation is one of the most important things that we teach as English teachers. It's very important because often students can learn how to read and write, but if they are not pronouncing their words correctly, they're going to have a lot of trouble communicating. And so I wanted to start out by letting you know that I attended a webinar on pronunciation that was given by proliteracy.org. And so I want to give special thanks to Stephen Reed, where I have shared a lot of his ideas in this webinar, as well as from my own teaching experience. So you can see in this picture here, we have a teacher who is pronouncing the letter O, and the student is mimicking her. And you can see she's making an exaggerated mouth movement so that when we create the letter, the O sound, we round our lips, O. And that's one of the techniques we're going to be talking about doing today, how we can model the correct way of moving our lips and mouths and vocal apparatus to make these sounds, but also just understanding what pronunciation is, and some tips and tricks for teaching it. So I'm going to start out with a little Bible passage here. In this image, you can see this is a painting called The Denial of Peter, and you can see Peter here warming himself over the fire, and way in the background, Jesus is back there having been captured. And let's go ahead. You guys are probably familiar with this story, but I'm going to read it to you. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." And let me share another bit of scripture that talks about the importance of accents and pronunciation. This is from Judges. "The men of Gilead captured the places where people crossed the Jordan River. Those places led to the country of Ephraim. Anytime a survivor from Ephraim came to the river and said, 'Let me cross,' the men of Gilead would ask him, 'Are you from Ephraim?' If he said no, they would say, 'Say the word Shibboleth.' The men of Ephraim could not say that word correctly. They pronounced the word Sibboleth. So if the man said Sibboleth, then the men of Gilead knew he was from Ephraim. So they would kill him at the crossing place. They killed 42,000 men from Ephraim." So you can see here that pronunciation is very important. It is it lets people know the way we pronounce our words tells people a lot about who we are, where we are from, our background, the area we are from, and things like our nationality, our region, even our social class are going to be reflected in the way we speak. And so, to some extent, your accent is part of who you are, and especially for adults learning a new language, you aren't going to be able to change your native accent that much. Children are better at this than adults are, but our role as teachers is to not to eradicate people's accents, but to help them be understood. And so we're going to be looking at some of the basics of teaching pronunciation, when to correct people, when to correct our students when they make mistakes, when not to correct them, what to look for in terms of mouth positions, vowel and consonant sounds, and stress patterns. And then just some general tips and tools and resources that we can use. So remember, with pronunciation, perfection will not happen overnight. It takes a long time and a lot of practice. Sounds that don't exist in your first language, or sometimes we refer to that as an abbreviation, L1, can be hard to hear and produce. So if we have a sound in English, like the sound is one of the common sounds in American English, a lot of people who don't have that sound in their language, they can't really hear it or distinguish it from some of the other vowel sounds, like the sound. And it's very hard for them to produce as well. And so typically, we will find that if you have the same sound in your language, it's not a problem. If you don't have that sound, you're going to have to practice it a lot more. We have to practice thoughtfully and pay attention to how we are articulating with our mouths and the sounds we're creating. We need to work at least a little bit every lesson on pronunciation. Repeat, repeat, repeat a lot. And also just to remember, your accent is part of who you are, and we all have accents. And so your accent is not something to be ashamed of or that you want to eradicate completely, but you want to make your language comprehensible. So when should we correct our students? One of the times we should correct them is when the error drastically affects communication, when they are saying a word completely wrong and people can't understand them. We might want to correct them on it, especially if it's habitual. When the error creates a different word, particularly if that could create an embarrassing situation for the student. So for example, some of my students have a trouble distinguishing the long E from the short I sound. And so some words like beach and sheet, when they're pronounced with a long E, they mean something very different than if you pronounce them with a short I. These actually become bad words when we pronounce them with a short I. And sometimes we do need to teach our students those bad words just so they know that there is a difference between them. We should correct our students when they are first learning new vocabulary. So when you introduce a new word, they're saying it for the first time, that's a great time to work on pronunciation. When we get to the pronunciation focus of the lesson, that's a great time to work on pronunciation. And in our Light of the World lessons, part 4 is always pronunciation. And so we have time to work on it there. However, there are many times when you should not be correcting your students. One of those times is when correcting would interrupt the flow of conversation. So when your student is expressing themselves, when you're communicating well, you don't want to stop and correct them in the middle of that, because fluency is just as important and sometimes more important than pronunciation. When we correct students too frequently and interrupt the flow of the conversation, they get kind of tongue-tied or stammering, or they hesitate a lot because they're so worried about making mistakes. We don't want that to happen. We want them to be fluent in their speech. And so we don't normally correct when we're having a good conversation, we're understanding one another, and things are flowing. We don't want to correct when the error is significantly beyond the student's current level. So with beginner level students who have a first language that does not contain the TH sound, you're not in the first lesson going to be correcting them when they say "ta" instead of "the," because it's going to take quite a while before they can pronounce that sound that doesn't exist in their language. We also are not going to correct when the error is ingrained. That means the student is aware of the error, they know it's an error, but they can't change it. For example, when I studied Spanish in school, I could not make the double R sound in Spanish. It was just, I can't even make it now to tell you what it is. Probably Tanya could do that for us. But the double R sound is different than the single R sound in Spanish. And everybody else, or many of the other students in the class, were able to do it. I just could not get my tongue into that position to make that double R sound to say the word car in Spanish, carro. I would say it is caro. It's not pronounced caro. It's like caro with a rolling R. But so if my teacher had just spent all of the time correcting me for my mispronunciation of that double R sound, I wouldn't have gotten very far in Spanish. As it turned out, I was able to go ahead and learn all kinds of other things and learn to communicate pretty well. And when I get to that double R sound, I kind of substitute a different word. I use some sort of circumlocation, like instead of carro, I'll say automobile, which is another word for car in Spanish. And that gets me past having to pronounce that. So you will find some things your students are just going to be stuck with. They just can't make those sounds, and we don't want to berate them for it. Also, we don't want to correct when correcting the student would harm their confidence. So if it would be very embarrassing to correct them at a particular point when they're in front of, maybe they're in front of their spouse or they're in front of a colleague, it's not a good time to correct them. Okay, so we have here a sample of part 4, the pronunciation section of our Light of the World lessons. And you'll see we typically have 2 sounds that we're working on. And we also have the challenge column. And the challenge column is where you, as a teacher, are going to focus on that sound that is particularly hard for your students based on their first language. And so that's why we leave it blank, because it's going to be different for every student and every teacher what those particular sounds may be. But we usually go through, for example, with the sound ish, and we do a bunch of ish words: English, Jewish, Spanish, Polish, British, of, love, above, glove, oven, dove. And then we practice with a couple of sentences using those. Do you have a pair of oven gloves? I love the sound of British English. And so it gives students a few opportunities to practice those. So something to remember as we look at the next few slides, regional dialects are going to influence pronunciation even within the same country. For example, in the United States, some parts of the United States distinguish between the sounds of the names Don and Dawn, or cot and caught. So for me in the Midwest, I distinguish those sounds. Other parts of the United States say those words exactly the same. And so you will, everything that I'm showing you, there's going to be some regional variation. And that's just within the United States. Obviously, there's different types of English, right? There's British English, there's Australian English, Indian English. And so there's going to be a lot of variation. One thing we came across as we were writing The Light of the World lessons, even within our editorial team, when we came to the word grocery, we had some disagreements because different people on the team pronounced it differently. I tend to say grocery, but some people say grocery or grocery with 3 syllables. So there's going to be a difference of opinion. But typically you want to teach it the way your students are likely to hear it. So that means if you're teaching in North America and your students are living there, they will probably hear the North American pronunciation of your region where they are living. It's a little bit harder when we're doing English as a foreign language and people are not living in a country where English is spoken. Then you may want to go by your own pronunciation. So some things to look for as we're teaching pronunciation is the mouth position, the pronunciation of the vowels and the placement of your tongue as you are pronouncing those vowels, consonant pronunciation, and also stress patterns. So mouth placement, some things we talk about. If you look at the illustration here, you can see how the shape, the position of our lips and tongue and teeth change for different sounds. And there's also our throat is involved. So one of the big things we teach students is to place their hands on their throat to feel the vibration. So for example, when we make the S sound, there's no vibration in the voice box. It's just S. However, when we make the Z sound, it's Z. I tell them it's, it's like a little insect. You can feel it buzzing. The same thing with F and V. So help them to recognize there's those, we call those voiced and unvoiced sounds. Most consonants have a pair of like P and B, F and V, S and Z, where one is voiced and one is not voiced. They also want to look at what are your lips and tongue and teeth doing, and you may have to exaggerate this so they can see it. One thing that I find is helpful, and we'll talk about this a little later, is to have like a pocket mirror. So your students can look in the mirror and see their own mouths, because often they're not aware of how they are pronouncing things and the shape that their lips are making. So what is a vowel? Most of you probably know that a vowel is A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. We kind of memorize that. That's what a vowel is. However, linguistically speaking, what a vowel is a speech sound that is made without significant constriction of the flow of air from the lungs. So basically, your mouth is relaxed and you're going ah, you're you're just making sounds directly from your lungs, and you're not really squeezing that air through your teeth or tongue in a major way. One of the fun things to look at, this colorvowel.com has an interactive chart where you can look at some of these vowel sounds, and they've color coded them like blue, moon, and it kind of shows you the position in your mouth where these sounds are made. Okay, so here are some of the vowel sounds. And again, not everybody agrees how many vowel sounds there are in English. It varies according to region. But I'm showing you two things here. For the light of the world pronunciation symbols, I wanted to make it as simple as possible so that students didn't have to learn more squiggly letters in addition to the English alphabet. And so our symbols for the sounds are found here in this column. We use capital letters to represent the long vowels and lowercase letters for the short vowels. But often in the dictionary, you'll see the International Phonetic Alphabet symbols. So we have these here as well. Okay. Now the vowels are your lips and your tongue change position depending on where the vowel is sort of formed in your mouth. And so as we go down this way, you can see we start out with the long E: heat, hit, hate, head, hat. So your lips become sort of more open as you go through these. And your tongue placement also changes. So these sounds are sort of at the back of your tongue: hoot, hook, home, haunt, hot. So it's hard. I don't do a lot of this tongue placement with the beginning students, just because you can't see inside of your mouth very well to look at those positions. But it's as you start working a little more seriously with that, you may want to use a chart like this so they can see how the tongue moves. So we also have something called R-colored vowels, and that means when a vowel is followed by the letter R, it changes the pronunciation. So the eh sound, when it's with an R, it turns into more of an sound. So we say that the vowel can be colored by the following consonant. Okay, now what is a consonant? Most of you would say, as I would, that a consonant is all the rest of the sounds that are not vowels, which is true. But A consonant is a speech sound that is produced by constricting the air that comes out of your lungs. And so there's a few different ways that you can do that. One is called a stop, where you stop the air, like p, t, t, g. You're stopping the air. There's diverting the air. So these are called the nasal sounds because the air is diverted through your nose. Or hindering the air by kind of squeezing it between your teeth, like, or between your tongue, like s, s. So this is a great tool. I found there's a website called homespeechhome.com. They have a lot of good resources, but it can help to have your students understand how their mouth and lungs work to make sounds. So for lips, we can practice putting our lips together to make the p, and w sounds, or we just use the bottom lip when we make the and v sounds. Sometimes I'll do that really exaggerated just so they can see what's happening, like but having them use a mirror or look or even feel the position of their lips can help them with that. With our teeth, we close our teeth to make the S or Z sound. We put our top teeth on our bottom lip to make the F and V sound. And our tongue goes between the teeth for the sounds. And that's a unvoiced and voiced TH sound. For your nose, you can kind of feel that vibration in your nose as you make the sounds. And the ridge just behind your two front teeth is where you make the s, l, t, t, and n sounds. The front roof of your mouth, a little bit farther back from that ridge, is where we make the ch, j, sh, and zh sounds. And the back roof, way in the back of your mouth, is where you can feel the k, g, r sounds. The front of your tongue makes the t, d, s, z, all of these sounds. And the back of your tongue is used to make the k, g, and r sounds. By the way, it's very hard to pronounce sounds without putting a vowel before or after them, but we do try to do it. So instead of saying g, try just to say without putting a vowel with it. Your vocal cords vibrate on these voice sounds, b, d, g, z. They don't vibrate for the voiceless sounds like p, t, k. And finally, your lungs are used with every sound, especially the H sound. And so that can be something for students to be aware of too, is their breathing, because sometimes they're so focused on trying to get their mouths in the right position that they're not expelling enough air. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the consonants quickly. And again, you'll see on the left the International Phonetic Alphabet symbols that you may see in a dictionary, and then the light of the world symbols that we use for these. Whenever you see a letter between these two slashes, that means that we're talking about the pronunciation of the sound, not the actual letters. So, for example, the Z sound, when you see it between these two slashes, that's talking about the Z pronunciation, but it may be spelled, and often is spelled, with an S. So this has to do with pronunciation, not spelling. Now, one thing that can be really challenging for students is blends, which are combined consonants, when you have 2 or 3 consonants in a row. Some languages don't allow that. And so, for example, Japanese, they don't have combined consonants. And so they want to put a syllable, a vowel between each of those. And it's very hard for them not to put a vowel between it. Sometimes the blends can be challenging just in particular positions. So, for example, in Spanish, S blends are always preceded by a vowel at the beginning of a word. And so it's hard for students from Spanish language backgrounds to say a phrase like I scream. They tend to say I scream, scream. They put in like a little E in front of that because that's how it would typically be pronounced in Spanish. However, they have no problem saying ice cream, right? And so the trick is, if they have that issue where they want to put a consonant before an initial sound, just have them move that S over to the previous syllable. So instead of saying I scream, they'll say ice cream. Or instead of the school, they'll say thus cool. So you can break those up in different ways. That just kind of makes it simpler. Now, the quickest thing to make you more easily understood, and this is a trick that actors and singers use, is to focus on the final consonant sound. When we pronounce the final sound clearly, it makes us more understandable. And that can be something your students need to focus on. A lot of students will tend to drop off the ends of their words. Now, the second part of pronunciation we have in all of the Light of the World lessons is hum and clap the stress. And so this is where we show that words are made with different syllables, and the stressed syllables are longer, louder, and higher in pitch. So, for example, here we have the sound, or if we clap it, we will usually, if we clap it, we'll do it with a soft clap and a loud clap. Repairs, machines, a chef, a boss, a slave. When we hum it, it's repairs, machines, a chef, a boss, a slave. So notice that that first syllable is shorter. The second syllable of these words is higher, longer, and louder in pitch. And we spend a lot of time practicing the stress, because if you don't stress your words on the correct syllable, it can make them impossible to understand, even if you're pronouncing all your consonants and vowels correctly. So here's just a few patterns that we see in stressing words, which may be helpful for your students. Of course, there are always exceptions in the English language, But generally, in two-syllable nouns, the first syllable is stressed, like teacher, table. For adjectives, it's the same. The first syllable is stressed when there's two syllables. Clever, spacious, happy. But for two-syllable verbs, we tend to put the stress on the second syllable. Repeat, decide. And so teaching the students these stress patterns can help them in identifying which syllable is going to be stressed. For words that are both nouns and verbs, we have a lot of words in English that can be used as a noun or a verb, like progress and progress. So as a noun, the first syllable is stressed. As a verb, the second syllable is stressed. Another example is record and record. So some things you can do to practice with your students when they're having trouble with sounds is to use minimal pairs. And minimal pairs are pairs of words that are identical except for one sound. So bat and bet is a minimal pair. Sit and set, ship and chip. And you can find lists of minimal pairs just by doing a Google search or some of these other websites. Home Speech Home has a lot of lists of minimal pairs. Another thing you can do is encourage your students to record their voices and listen to themselves. Use a mirror. So I will often ask students to have a little, or I'll pass out little pocket mirrors so they can look at their teeth and tongues as they are pronouncing the words. Some other tools you can use are the game Odd One Out. So you can give them, you can say 3 words like heat, seat, hit, and you'll ask them which word has a different sound, which one has a different vowel sound. Or with consonants like plays, place, space, which one has a different final sound for the consonants. In this case, it's plays, because plays has a Z sound, place and space have the S sound. So some resources, tools for clear speech, Home Speech Home, Rachel's English videos on YouTube, and tongue twisters can also be good tools to practice with your students. And you can get all of these links along with the whole slide presentation in the invitation for your webinar. And I should be updating that later today to add these new slides to it. Oh, and also that color vowel chart I showed you before, that's a fun one to look at that can be helpful to your students. So a few more tips. One is to slow down. It's easier to hear pronunciation when the teacher speaks slowly, and also for students, some of them have a tendency to speak too quickly and they're not enunciating enough. So you can encourage them to slow down to improve their pronunciation. Also, have them listen carefully. It can take quite a while of listening before you can even hear the new sounds. And so students may need to be listening to you saying new sounds and listening to other sources like videos or podcasts before they can actually start to differentiate and hear the differences between those sounds. We often do listen and repeat. And so that's a great way to practice if they repeat what they hear right away. And of course, practice, practice, practice. So thank you guys so much for listening to this. And I'm gonna stop now and take questions.